The prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our Queen and to her government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Honorable members, please remain standing for the playing of God Save the Queen.
God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen. God save the Queen. Send her victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the Queen.
Members, I ask that you please remain standing. As Speaker of the Alberta Legislature, the province with the largest concentration of Ukrainians in Canada, in a country with the second largest diaspora of Ukrainians in the world, I say that today we are all Ukrainians, because we believe that all peoples of the world should be able to choose democracy over tyranny. And for that reason, the legislature of Alberta is with Ukraine and prays for peace. As the saying goes in Ukraine, and even more importantly today, for those confronting the Russian aggressors and protecting their families, Slava Ukraini, Heroium Slava. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. I ask that you remain standing in solidarity with the people of Ukraine as we play the national anthem of Ukraine. Please be seated.
Introduction of visitors.
Honorable members, today I'm very pleased to have a face that many of you will remember and know and appreciate, Wayne Drysdale, the former member of Grand Prairie Wapiti, sitting in my gallery today. I think everyone will agree, all of our favorite Drysdales. His wife Sherry is also joining him. They are joined by Vaughn Ben, the CEO of Aquaterra Utilities. Please welcome.
Introduction of guests.
Honourable members, also seated in the gallery of the speaker today is Mountain View County Councillor Alan Miller, the Lobenstein family, Scott, Heather, Gunther, Martin, and Linnea. Today in the public gallery are special guests of the member for Bonnyville Cold Lake St. Paul. Please welcome Her Worship Alyssa Barrasso, Mayor of Bonnyville. Welcome, thank you for joining us.
Ministerial statements.
The Honourable, the Premier of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, I stand on behalf of the Government of Alberta to express our solidarity with the people of Ukraine for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the great modern democratic Ukrainian state. Mr. Speaker, as you eloquently noted, Alberta has been built in large part thanks to the contribution of hundreds of thousands of Canadians of Ukrainian origin. We owe much to our own freedom and prosperity to people of Ukrainian descent who have built our own society. And so there is a special, deep, and abiding relationship between Alberta and Ukraine, indeed between Canada and Ukraine. We are all shocked and horrified to see the images of a full-scale military invasion of Ukraine by the forces of Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation in what constitutes the largest act of military aggression in Europe since 1945, the scale and consequences of which are unthinkable. The loss of human life, the deprivation of security and basic freedoms, the dislocation potentially of millions of peaceful civilians in what can only be described as a brutal and horrific war crime. Mr. Speaker, this did not begin yesterday. Vladimir Putin's aggression against Ukraine began 8 years ago with his invasion of Crimea and his de facto invasion through Russian separatist forces of the Donbas region in the provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk. Canada proudly has played a role in supporting Ukraine and its military in better responding to these challenges to its sovereignty. As Minister of National Defence, I was proud to deploy Her Majesty's Canadian Forces to Ukraine in Operation Unifier, which for the past 7 years has trained over 60,000 Ukrainian troops, modernizing them and improving their tactics to prepare for, sadly, this inevitable day. But the story of Russian aggression against Ukraine did not begin 8 years ago. Indeed, for centuries there have been efforts to obliterate Ukrainian nationality, language, and its distinctive culture, an effort that reached its apogee during the Holodomor famine genocide of 1932 and 33, when some 10 million Ukrainians were victims of a genocide planned and executed by Vladimir Putin's predecessor in Moscow, Joseph Stalin. So when we, as Albertans, stand to remember the victims of the Holodomor, what we are doing is remembering a lesson of history about the underlying aggression that has long existed with Muscovite expansionism and Russian imperialism, which today is wreaking havoc on the streets of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, we express our most profound solidarity with the women and men and children of Ukraine at this moment of great adversity. But we also express confidence in the Ukrainian spirit to overcome this violent effort to obliterate the Ukrainian nation by Vladimir Putin, who for too long has been allowed to develop the wealth, the military strength, the policy of aggression, not only in Ukraine but elsewhere. His participation in the Syrian civil war was simply one part of the path to this day of horrific aggression. And so I believe I speak on behalf of all honourable members when I call on the Government of Canada and indeed the entire civilized world to stand together in unity and strength in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. To do otherwise is to invite further aggression. I am encouraged to see that Article 4 consultations amongst the NATO member states have begun today. We are encouraged to see the provision of humanitarian equipment to Ukrainian civil society by the Government of Canada, to which the Government of Alberta is making a contribution. But, Mr. Speaker, more must be done. The world must impose a hard and immediate sanction on all Russian energy imports. It is an unpardonable scandal that Russia should be able to continue to fill its treasury to finance this act of mass violence through its global energy sales. That must end immediately with the hardest possible and broadest economic sanctions on Russia that must be coordinated by all peace-loving countries around the world. And, Mr. Speaker, we call on the Government of Canada to lead the way in that respect. Mr. Speaker, I further call on the Government of Canada and our allies around the world to be relentless in freezing the assets and making life impossible for the billionaire plutocrats of Putin's Russia, his enablers, who have assets here in Canada and all around the world, who have profited from 2 decades of corruption and aggression. We must make it clear that Vladimir Putin and his gang of thugs are persona non grata throughout the democratic world. Mr. Speaker, let me close by saying that we are all moved by the scenes that are emanating from Ukraine, but I have been to Ukrainian military bases. I have seen our Canadian troops equipping them with world-class knowledge and skills. And, Mr. Speaker, I, for one, have confidence that the people of Ukraine will valiantly defend the promise of their freedom and independence that has been so hard-fought and hard-won. So, Mr. Speaker, the people of Ukraine are also people of a profound faith. And so I join with so many others in praying for the intercession of the Theotokos, for the protection of Ukraine and her people. Slava Ukraini!
I believe the Honourable the Premier has a special request for unanimous consent.
At this time, I wish to ask for unanimous consent to waive Standing Order 39 in order to provide notice of a government motion in support of Ukraine.
Honourable members, the Premier has asked for unanimous consent to waive Standing Order 39. I will ask only one question. Is anyone opposed to providing unanimous consent? If so, indicate now. Unanimous consent is granted. The Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I now rise to ask for unanimous consent to waive Standing Order 7 in order to proceed immediately to consideration of Government Motion 11.
I will ask only one question. Is anyone opposed to providing unanimous consent to move immediately to Government Motion 11? Anyone opposed, indicate so now. Unanimous consent is granted. The Clerk.
Government motions. Motion number 11. Honourable Mr. Kenny.
The Honourable the Premier of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move Government Motion 11. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine as an unprovoked and illegal act of aggression, affirm the solidarity of Alberta with the people of Ukraine and Albertans' support for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and call on the Government of Canada to impose the strongest possible sanctions on the Russian Federation and to provide with the greatest urgency generous humanitarian support to Ukraine.
Honourable members, Government Motion 11 is debatable. Are there anyone wishing to join in the debate? Seeing and hearing none, I am prepared to call the question. On the question, as proposed by the Honourable the Premier of Government Motion 11, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. Government Motion 11 is passed unanimously. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview to respond to the ministerial statement on behalf of the official opposition.
Slava Isusu Christu. As our eyes and hearts are fixed on Ukraine, it is vital that we come together in support of those impacted by the atrocious actions of Vladimir Putin, condemning in the strongest possible way these brazen attacks on a sovereign, democratic nation. Alongside the 245,000 in our province, I am also an Albertan of Ukrainian descent. For so many of us, this invasion has a deeply personal impact. Alberta has the largest population of those with Ukrainian heritage in our country. We have brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, friends and loved ones who are now living through horror I cannot imagine. And I'm reminded of our parents and grandparents who came to Canada, in many cases, to escape these types of horrors, who may be looking back at their own histories, reminded again of the harm caused by tyranny and egregious, unprovoked attacks. My heart goes out to each and every one of you. Ukraine has been explicit in their desire for peace and harmony with their neighbors. The NDP caucus stands proudly with those supporting Ukrainian sovereignty and independence. By choosing to instigate a catastrophic, unprovoked, and unjustified attack, the Russian Federation is infringing upon the rights and freedoms of a democratic nation, violating international law and bringing on catastrophic loss of life and human suffering. We must all come together in our province, in our country, and across the globe to support Ukraine and its people's rights to determine their own future, protecting the democratic institutions and values we hold dear. Now more than ever, the world needs to respond swiftly and firmly, holding the Russian Federation accountable in a united and decisive way. We must show solidarity with the people of Ukraine and provide whatever help we can as individuals and as institutions. And we must show compassion to those who are living in fear for their lives or the lives of their loved ones who are experiencing loss and devastation on an overwhelming scale. I, alongside my colleagues, unequivocally condemn Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine and their blatant violations of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the right to self-determination. Ми разом з народом України. Слава Україні!
Honourable members, the time is 1:50, and it is oral question period. And the Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I, like so many Albertans, have been horrified to see the violent actions of the Russian Federation President Vladimir Putin. I feel for the many, many Ukrainians living here in Alberta who are watching with horror and worried about the safety of their loved ones. I do know the government provided $1 million in humanitarian aid yesterday for the Ukrainian community, and I want to thank the Premier for that. Can the Premier tell the House what else is being done by the Government of Alberta today to assist Ukrainians in our province, and what support is he committed to the federal government to aid in this humanitarian crisis?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his eloquent statement and his thoughtful question. Mr. Speaker, last night I hosted a roundtable meeting, including His Excellency the Consul General of Ukraine in Alberta, former Premier Stelmach, and leaders of the Ukrainian Canadian community to seek their input on exactly that question. At that meeting, we announced $1 million of monetary support for the Canada-Ukraine Foundation to provide humanitarian relief to Ukrainian civil society. And I've indicated we would like to receive input on what additional practical support the Government of Alberta could provide.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clairvaux.
Through you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for that answer. Alberta's NDP reaffirms our solidarity with the people of Ukraine, and we believe diplomacy, not conflict, is the best way forward. Still, the situation before us is largely out of the control of this legislature. What we can control is how we support those struggling to locate loved ones in Ukraine. Will the Premier begin establishing specific supports to help Albertans with family in Ukraine reconnect with their loved ones in the country?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the member's right to be concerned about this. In fact, there's a member of my office, the Premier's office staff, who was speaking to his mother in Kharkiv last night as bombs were falling audibly on the telephone, Mr. Speaker. And so our hearts go out to all of those Albertans who have loved ones who are being so directly affected by this. Mr. Speaker, the question that the member asks is the responsibility of the consular section of the Department of Global Affairs, but we will provide any necessary assistance to connect Albertans seeking Canadians or relatives to ascertain their well-being.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Premier. Our government was so pleased to celebrate the opening of Alberta's Ukrainian consulate and to declare Ukrainian Canadian Heritage Day on September 7th. Each year we mark this important occasion. Now, while those decisions were important and I was proud to play a role in them, they provide little comfort to those seeking some reassurance, some hope in these dark days. People need that comfort here and now. Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. I'll be attending and speaking at a rally outside of the legislature this evening in support of Ukrainians here, across Canada, and back home. Will the Premier join in a show of solidarity and unified support of this House at tonight's gathering?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I commend the member for that and encourage all members to attend, as I did with the Government Caucus earlier today, to attend events such as that, which likely will be happening all across the province. As I mentioned, I hosted the event last night, and if I'm able to, I will certainly be present at the function here. I expect that in the days to come we can see Albertans of Ukrainian origin, but I hope this is a moment for solidarity outside of the Ukrainian community. I hope that all people of goodwill in this province will find a way to express their voice of revulsion at the military aggression of Vladimir Putin, because if it can happen in Europe today, it can happen anywhere.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 2 long years, Alberta's public health care workers have worked tirelessly, heroically, to shield their communities from the COVID-19 pandemic. Sadly, at every turn, they've been failed by a UCP government that's more interested in protecting its own political interests than the health of Albertans and their families. Now, instead of taking responsibility for their failures, the UCP is bent on dismantling the public health care system that served us so well. Every dollar spent on profit and shareholder dividends is a dollar not spent on maintaining or staffing public hospitals across Alberta. Why is this Premier doubling down on his plan to funnel health care dollars into the pockets of the UCP's wealthy friends?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that is just completely ridiculous. Under the NDP, 15% of surgeries insured by Alberta Health were performed in privately operated chartered surgical facilities. So, Mr. Speaker, we are simply proposing to increase the percentage in order to perform more surgeries. The NDP's preference, I guess, now that they're not in government, is to create a complete monopoly for surgeries only to be performed in government hospitals, which would only have the effect of lengthening the surgical wait times, forcing people to live in pain as their physical condition deteriorates. That is not compassionate, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Well, Mr. Speaker, speaking of lengthening wait times and people waiting in pain, the Premier likes to tout Saskatchewan as his model for private delivery. And that example is actually very instructive because surgical wait times in Saskatchewan are longer today than they've ever been. They poured tax dollars into a scheme that definitely made a few people very rich, but completely failed patients and families in Saskatchewan. So why won't the Premier tell Albertans the whole story about this failed experiment with for-profit healthcare that he's determined to force on patients and families in Alberta?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, under the current NDP government in British Columbia, there is significantly greater private provision of surgery and other care than is the case here in Alberta. In Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan NDP has said that they will not reverse the Saskatchewan Strategic Surgical Initiative because it has been successful. And here in Alberta, under the NDP government, they approved 42 private chartered surgical facilities, adding 40,000 private surgeries to Alberta's capacity, 15% of the total, Mr. Speaker. Why was it okay under the NDP, but innovation is bad under a Conservative government?
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, data from the Saskatchewan Health Authority, published in the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix today, shows that more than 35,000 people are currently waiting for surgery, almost 3 times as many as were waiting in 2015. Saskatchewan is the 3rd worst province in Canada for getting knee replacements done on time, the 2nd worst for hip replacements. They trail Alberta badly on every measure. So why is this Premier so obsessed with imitating this expensive, failed experiment in for-profit healthcare and imposing higher costs and longer wait times on Alberta patients and families?
The Premier.
I appreciate the question from an expert on surgical wait times, because while he was in office, Mr. Speaker, open heart surgery wait times increased by 50% in Alberta. Cataract surgery wait times increased by nearly 30%. Hip replacement wait times increased by nearly 30%. Knee replacement wait times increased by 23%. The percentage of patients from the emergency department treated and admitted to hospital within hours had declined from 46 to 44%. Mr. Speaker, we will not accept the NDP's failed record of longer surgical wait times. We're taking action to get the problem under control.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View is next.
Despite the rosy tweets and videos this government has been sharing, Albertans have been struggling to make ends meet because of skyrocketing utility prices. Yesterday, the MLA for Lethbridge West and I illustrated the choices facing many families, like whether to buy food or keep the electricity on. The Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity dismissed the struggles of these families and blamed them for not seeking price protection. Will the Premier today commit to standing up for these families, or does he share the views of his Associate Minister?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that coming from a member who, first of all, whose government spent $4 billion on new transmission infrastructure, forcing up electricity rates, that shut down in a rush the lowest source of electricity in Alberta, our baseload thermal coal plants, that brought in a massive carbon tax and wedded it to Justin Trudeau's $170 carbon tax plan, that completely screwed up the balancing pool, Mr. Speaker, costing Albertans over $1 billion. If there is a problem with electricity prices in Alberta right now, those are the culprits, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Since this Premier took office, electricity prices have nearly tripled, and the Premier ruled out any sort of supports for those who are now scaling back on food in order to keep the lights on during an Alberta winter. There are multiple options to help struggling families, but the UCP won't consider any of them. Combined with the UCP's increases to income taxes, park fees, tuition, property taxes, and more, it's making life unaffordable for Albertans. Is the Premier really fine with making families choose between paying their electricity bills or buying diapers for their babies?
The Honourable the Premier.
No, absolutely not, Mr. Speaker. And that's why Bill number 1, passed by this government, was the Carbon Tax Repeal Act. That's why we told the power companies that if they wanted to continue to generate power with coal until 2030, they could, unlike the NDP's plan that forced them off the grid. That's why we have stopped new transmission infrastructure, which the NDP overbuilt, that has forced up power prices. Mr. Speaker, if they want to know who's responsible for unreasonably high electricity prices, to coin a phrase, the NDP, well, they should look in the mirror.
The Honourable Member.
Last session, when asked about supporting these families, the Associate Minister proudly bragged to this House that their plan was to do nothing. Nothing, as Calgarians are seeing bills increase by up to $460 over last year, and nearly half of Albertans report they're having difficulty feeding their families due to these rising costs. Alberta families should never have to choose between putting food on the table and keeping the lights on. Yeah. Premier, one last time, what are these families supposed to do? Eat in the dark?
The Honourable Premier.
First of all, Mr. Speaker, the minister said no such thing. Secondly, will the member rise and admit that the NDP ideology supports higher electricity prices, higher power prices, higher gas prices, higher heating prices? That's the whole darn point behind their carbon tax, Mr. Speaker. They are trying to make energy less affordable so that people then, what did they say? Take the bus to work. Mr. Speaker, their carbon tax, their Trudeau carbon tax is what's punishing people. Will the NDP join us in fighting it?
The order, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
$44 million per day, $864 million in total. That's how much the illegal Coutts blockade cost the Alberta economy. This blockade hurt all economic sectors in Alberta, but hit agriculture the hardest. Delays at the border meant cattle had to wait to be transported. GPS in Cargill, which processes 2/3 of the nation's beef, had to cut shifts and delay payments, causing a decrease in auction prices. What will the Premier do to support farmers who have experienced economic loss as a result of this illegal blockade? Will he be providing compensation?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Coutts blockade was an illegal action that was a violation of the rule of law, which is why the RCMP enforced the rule of law. However, Mr. Speaker, while there was great inconvenience, particularly for livestock exporters, the truth is that we worked around the clock to keep the 5 other ports of entry between Alberta and Montana open and operating with extended hours, with U.S. Livestock safety checks. Mr. Speaker, we got the job done to continue with traffic for exports.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
The UCP should have taken action to stop the illegal blockade. Yet, instead of acting quickly and fanning the flames, they didn't. Multiple members of the UCP supported the illegal blockade online, and members of Tabby Warner even went to the front lines of the illegal blockade and claimed to be inspired. The supply chain was disrupted greatly over the past 2 years, and this blockade made those challenges so much worse. Why did the Minister of Agriculture stay silent while members of his caucus support illegal blockades which hurt the law-abiding farmers trying to transport their goods? The Premier needs to remove those MLAs out of his caucus and do it today.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, no member of the government caucus supported illegality. A member visited his constituents because that's a member's job, Mr. Speaker. But you know one thing that has disturbed supply chains in Canada and in North America? It is Justin Trudeau's ridiculous vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers. That is supported by the NDP, just like his arbitrary use of extraordinary police powers in the Emergencies Act, Mr. Speaker. Why is it that instead of standing up for Albertans, the NDP always stands up for Justin Trudeau?
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, the Coutts border crossing is our only 24-hour border crossing, and a single day of it being closed is too long. There are many actions the government could have taken, seeking a court injunction, suspending commercial operator licenses of people blocking the border. But of course, the Minister of Agriculture did not want to support those ideas because he never once expressed condemnation of the illegal protest. What were the priorities of this government and the Minister of Agriculture? Was he concerned with the financial hardships of the agriculture industry, or did he just give up?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we made very clear our expectation that the law had to be enforced. But while the NDP was screaming, demanding imprudent law enforcement, the government was in the possession of sensitive intelligence from the RCMP about a group of individuals who could lead to potential violence. The NDP would have pushed the RCMP into a provocation that could have led to a violent situation. Thank goodness they were not in office, Mr. Speaker.
Order, order. The Honourable Member for Red Deer South is the only one with the call.
Yesterday, the Premier, joined by ministers, including of Education and member for Red Deer North, announced a monumental expansion of the Red Deer Regional Hospital. The member for Innisfail Sylvan Lake and I we're also very happy to attend what my mayor called a monumental day. To the Premier, could you please share details about this monumental investment and how it will bless families and individuals throughout Central Alberta?
Order. The Premier has the call.
Thank you to the member for Red Deer South, Mr. Speaker, for his question, but more importantly, his diligent work on behalf of his constituents, together with the member for Red Deer North and all members from Central Alberta who have fought for years, together with the community, for this critical renewal and expansion of hospital capacity in Central Alberta. Yesterday, the single largest capital investment in the history of Central Alberta, the single largest hospital expansion in the history of Alberta healthcare, a $1.8 billion investment that will increase by 54% the number of beds in the Red Deer Hospital.
The honourable member for Red Deer South.
Given that the NDP did jack squat, given that we know that an expanded hospital is only as good as the services it provides and the health professionals serving in it, and given there is a perpetual chronic shortage issues for health professionals at the hospital and in other locations, can the Premier share how this government plans to address the ongoing AHS shortages of health professionals required to provide health services at the hospital?
Order. My only guess is that jack squat is very close to the edge of parliamentary language. The Honourable, the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can inform the honourable member that there are more nurses and doctors working in our healthcare system today than ever before, and the member will be pleased with additional investments to expand our healthcare workforce and capacity. But, Mr. Speaker, in 1997, the NDP government received a report saying that the Red Deer Regional Hospital was under massive pressure and needed urgently an expansion. And you know what their response was? The square root of nothing. Not a dollar, not a dime. Mr. Speaker, why did the NDP abandon the people of Central Alberta?
The honourable member.
Given that the NDP occupies seats doing nothing, given that for too long residents of Central Alberta have experienced reduced service, even diversions, because of AHS, the NDP, and growing demand and population at the hospital, can the Premier tell the legislature why he thinks it took AHS so long to get to this day, and why this government decided to make this a priority?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the honourable member's frustration at how long these projects take, but we must avoid a repeat of the Grand Prairie Hospital situation, Mr. Speaker, that took several years and went twice over budget. I'm just saying he sympathizes, not that he's responsible. Mr. Speaker, and I know the Honourable the Finance Minister is very focused on making sure that we do this right, and the Minister of Infrastructure will work with the member for Red Deer to ensure that it's done on time and on budget.
I know the Premier would never bring a member of the public into the debate here on the floor of the chamber. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Buller-Mucol.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Albertans were rightly concerned when they learned that the former Minister of Justice, now the Minister for Edmonton Southwest, called the Chief of Police after receiving a distracted driving ticket. Action like this are completely unacceptable and violate the rule of law that all Albertans follow on a daily basis. And so while a report into this serious matter has been completed, it has been hidden from the public who deserve to see it. So will the Premier, while leaving, commit to releasing the full report today? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you. And I know, Mr. Speaker, you know it's a point of order to mention whether a member is in the House or not, or anything about that, which just happened. But the Honourable Member also knows, and he's only right about one thing, the report's been received, and in due course, which won't be too long, there will be a report come back to this House, and that would be the orderly way to resolve this issue, Mr. Speaker.
My hesitation was I thought that perhaps someone was referring, I just didn't hear it quite correctly, and that would be a point of order if he was referring to the presence of or absence of a member. I'm sure he won't be doing it again. The Honourable Member.
Given that during the week of lawlessness we saw the Coots border crossing, Alberta had a part-time Justice Minister. And given that Alberta didn't see any action from this government except that members of their caucus were encouraging law enforcement to break the law, and others in the government caucus actually break the law themselves by joining in the blockade. Would the minister without title, the minister for nothing, perhaps you might call him, have done anything different to end the illegal blockade?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy and the Acting Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And despite that barrage of insults against me, I'd like to affirm to the room that our government took action with respect to the Coutts blockade. Mr. Speaker, it became very apparent partway through the border blockade that there was a very dangerous system and a very dangerous element of people down there. While the NDP was tweeting about getting an injunction, Mr. Speaker, we were cautious. We let the police do the work. It wasn't escalated. There was no violence. And the border was cleared.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable the Member.
Given that the member for Edmonton Southwest, the Minister of Nothing, is still a member of Executive Council, and given that Albertans who are working longer and harder to deal with a government that has made life harder and more expensive for families have a right to know what the member of this cabinet is doing to support them. So can the minister without a responsibility from Edmonton Southwest explain what exactly he is doing these days in Executive Council? Be specific, Minister of Nothing.
A point of order is noted at 2:11. The Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the way that question was asked was below the honourable member, really based on attempts to make personal insults, which I suppose is the NDP way of doing things. But, Mr. Speaker, this issue will be resolved in due course. As the honourable members have noted, there's a report forthcoming. It will come to this House shortly, and that is the proper way to deal with this, not through personal insults, which seem to be what the other side is up to today.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar has a question.
Speaking of reports that we're waiting to see, Mr. Speaker, it's been 57 days since this minister has had the coal report dropped on her desk for a review. 57 days is a long time. In 57 days, you can sow and harvest a crop of carrots. In 57 days, you can study and train to get a pilot's license. In 57 days, you can arguably sail around the entire globe. But for some reason, this minister has not been able to review and release the coal report presented to her 57 days ago. So my question to the minister is simple. What's the holdup?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question from the member from Edmonton Gold Bar. Mr. Speaker, we'll be releasing the coal report in the next couple of weeks, along with our answers to their very, very thoughtful recommendations. Mr. Speaker, we'll be taking action to ensure that the eastern slopes are protected.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Given that this coal committee spent months putting together their findings for the minister to review, and given that multiple other reports have been completed on coal mining in the eastern slopes in that time, including a wide-ranging analysis from the University of Calgary concluding that the net economic benefit of coal mining in these areas is minimal, and given that even in the initial survey from the coal committee, the very first steps concluded that this government must immediately stop coal exploration in the Rockies, why is the minister dragging her feet to review the hard work of this committee and answer Albertans? Or does she simply not agree with their findings?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I share the member's concerns and his love of the eastern slopes. Every place in Alberta is beautiful, Mr. Speaker, but the beauty in the eastern slopes is unparalleled. And that's why we'll be releasing the coal report with a series of measures to ensure that the eastern slopes are protected now and for future generations.
Member.
Given that in an update to the High River Town Council earlier this year, the mayor described the premier as, quote, a full-on, unapologetic supporter of coal mining, end quote, and given that this minister's backpedaling after rescinding the 1976 Lougheed coal policy made it very clear that this report was to look for ways to responsibly mine coal in the Rockies, even after Albertans have made it clear that they want zero coal mining activity. When is the minister going to finally listen to Albertans and stop this government's attempts to mine coal in the eastern slopes? Just say that you'll ban it.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Coal Committee heard from Albertans for over a period of about 5 months. They've made some very thoughtful recommendations, which I'm looking forward to implementing. We'll be releasing the results from the Coal Policy Committee in the next couple of weeks with steps to ensure that we will be protecting the eastern slopes. And that, Mr. Speaker, is something that you'll be hearing from more in the future. There's nothing more beautiful than our eastern slopes, and our government will protect them.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Medicine Hat has a question.
The theme of this week's speech from the throne was self-congratulatory rhetoric, proving once again this government couldn't be any more tone deaf. With unemployment above the national average and runaway inflation destroying savings, Alberta families are worse off today. A speech claiming, and I quote, "Our economy is strong and quality of life is second to none," unquote, doesn't change the harsh reality Alberta families are facing. At 2,500 words, the throne speech didn't mention inflation once. To the Premier, exactly how detached from reality is your government?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member is right. Our economy is strong and our quality of life is second to none. And Mr. Speaker, our very skilled, talented and hardworking Finance Minister will rise in this House this afternoon to lay out our plan going forward, which will be in the interest of all Albertans, will strengthen the economy, will strengthen the quality of life, will strengthen the investment in Alberta, will strengthen the healthcare system, will strengthen the way that Albertans will want to be here forever, because that's the great job he does.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Medicine Hat.
Given, in the speech from the throne, the government is trying to claim, as he did, that the Alberta is in great economic shape. And given the government is also doubling down on corporate welfare in some misguided scheme to fix the economy, and given far too many Albertans are struggling to make ends meet while inflation destroys their savings. Again, to the Premier, if you truly believe Alberta families are better off under your leadership, why are you doubling down on Liberal-style corporate welfare and NDP-style tax and spend schemes?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister is going to be making his presentation here momentarily, Mr. Speaker, to highlight the improvement to the fiscal situation here in the province of Alberta. And I'm excited to hear what he has to bring to this chamber, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, 130,000 jobs created last year alone in this province, Mr. Speaker, recovering all of the jobs lost during the pandemic, Mr. Speaker. Alberta is going to continue to lead the entire country in growth, Mr. Speaker, more diversified than ever.
The Honourable Member.
Given it is obvious by the throne speech that this government has become completely disconnected from the realities facing Alberta families, and given in December Alberta's paid 4.8% more for goods and services, given meat prices are up 13%, electricity prices are up 34%, gasoline prices 37%, and given prices continue to rise, some restaurants now are writing their prices in temporary marker. My question to the Finance Minister, how much does a jug of milk cost Albertans?
Honourable the Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry that the Honourable Member is so offended by 130,000 new jobs. I'm sorry the Honourable Member is offended by the investment, the job creation, the things that will actually allow Albertans to afford that jug of milk, the things that will allow Albertans to support their families, the things that will allow Albertans to pay their mortgages. I know the Honourable Member is offended by the success of this Finance Minister and this government in helping the Albertans' economy come back, but Mr. Speaker, we're guilty of that good work.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
Mr. Speaker, every year the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate reports progress made by ministries that serve youth and children on implementing the Advocate's recommendations. These recommendations come mainly from mandatory death reviews, which identify if the circumstances that led to the death of a child or a former child in care has its roots in policy and procedure. Yet the UCP government allowed 21 recommendations to close last year due to lack of progress. Can the Minister of Children's Services explain to this Assembly what work has been done on improving child intervention under her watch, because clearly that work did not address the recommendations of the Advocate?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do actually appreciate the question from the member opposite. We are absolutely committed to continuously improving our child intervention services and the programs that we offer children and youth in care. The Child and Youth Advocate is a valued and respected partner in this work, an advisor, and I do want to thank him, as I know his retirement is upcoming, for the very important work that he does and the relationship that we've built over the last 2 years. Mr. Speaker, we do review all recommendations that come out of the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate to determine whether or not changes to current policies or practices are needed to help improve safety for children. We will continue to do that.
Honourable Member for Edmonton-Whitemud.
A lot of talk and no action. Given that the 2018 Ministerial Panel on Child Intervention recommended enhanced accountability for youth-serving ministries, reviewing the annual report of the Child and Youth Advocate is part of that, and given that all those reviews have taken place under this government, and each time the UCP have used our majority to refuse the Advocate's calls to hear from relevant ministries on the work they've done to address these recommendations. To the same minister, this is a pattern of dodging accountability. Are UCP committee members acting to protect the government because there are no answers, or is it because no work is being done by this government?
Wow. The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I can tell you, and I have committed to this a number of times in this House, is that unlike the members opposite, part of the reason why members on our side of the House called for an all-party panel on child intervention was because there was absolutely no transparency and no accountability, Mr. Speaker, under their government. Mr. Speaker, that is not the case. In fact, every time we receive recommendations from the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate, Mr. Speaker, we do look at those recommendations, we respond, and those responses are in fact posted publicly online. We can send the link if she needs it.
The Honourable Member.
Wow. Well, here's the minister's chance to prove she's committed to accountability, given that when the Legislative Offices Committee met in January to review the Child and Youth Advocate's annual report, the member from Calgary-Curry said that that committee wasn't the right forum for the government to answer questions about its work, if any, to protect children and youth in care. And given that last week I wrote to the chair of the Standing Committee on Families and Communities, asking her to call a meeting to hear from all ministries with outstanding recommendations from the Child and Youth Advocate, will the Minister of Children's Services commit today to supporting this call for public accountability to ensure improved outcomes for children and youth in care?
Good question. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the member opposite would know, I can't speak to what had gone on at committee, but what I can tell you is this. We are absolutely committed to looking at every single recommendation that comes to not only Children's Services, but I do know, Mr. Speaker, that my colleagues in other ministries, whether that be Justice, Health, Community and Social Services, Mental Health and Addictions, take those recommendations seriously, and we will absolutely respond with changes, whether that be to legislation, to regulations, or to policy and practice where they're needed, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
Cost of living is increasing for all Albertans, and seniors are feeling the hit. Insurance has skyrocketed, and utility prices are out of control because of this UCP government. As inflation continues to increase, it's harder for seniors to afford their basic needs. As Minister, I was proud to index the seniors' benefit to the rate of inflation for the thousands of seniors who require it, so that when the cost of living increases, so does their support. Will the Minister of Seniors and Housing commit to tying the seniors' benefit to increases in inflation so seniors are supported?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Seniors and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speakers. Yes, of course, we always protect the senior and, oh, my earrings, sorry. And we provide a number of programs and services to senior and make sure they're safe, healthy, and connected in the community. And it's just wonderful, your record. Every year, and the Minister of Health and myself and others, the ministry provide $8.6 billion and the service and support for the investing in the senior. We will continue to look after our senior.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
Given that many seniors are desperately in need of affordable housing, in fact, over 45% of seniors spend more than 30% of their income on housing, given that as the cost of living continues to increase, seniors are worried if they will be able to remain in their own homes. For seniors in need of affordable housing, the seniors' benefit is crucial. Will the Minister explain why she thought cutting the seniors' benefit was a good idea, and will she commit to reversing this cruel decision?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Seniors and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers. Well, in fact, that we have been building about 15,000 units so far in 2.5 years, way more than the NDP built in the last 4 years. Mr. Speakers, we can continue to build more affordable housing for seniors, for those most vulnerable who needs housing the most.
The honourable member.
Given that seniors have been disrespected by this government as they were neglected throughout the pandemic, as their pensions have been attacked, and as those on the seniors' benefit are forced to make ends meet amid skyrocketing costs and no government support. And given that if the seniors' benefit was re-indexed to inflation, a couple would have $350 more to help them. I know for many who have been reaching out to me, that would make a real difference in their lives. Can the minister explain why the UCP is so committed to ensuring that seniors have less? Why is she forcing many to live in poverty?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers. In fact, that in Alberta, most of the seniors are enjoying the highest benefit across Canada, and we have the lowest poverty for the seniors. So that we will continue to do that. But we remind you that I don't understand that the NDP the last 4 years haven't done much for the senior. And now they question this as a government. But we remind you that, Minister, wait until you hear the budget for later on this year, and then you know that how much we support our senior in Alberta.
The honourable member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. COVID-19 has created numerous challenges for small businesses. As people become more reluctant to shop in person, the digital marketplace is increasingly important. Many small and medium-sized businesses do not have a business website, mainly because of the lack of technical expertise or high costs. In order to help these businesses overcome these hurdles, our government provided funding to Shop Here, powered by Google. Can the Minister of JEI advise this House on the objectives of this program and its eligibility criteria?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to that member for the question. Small businesses during the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, were disrupted, and more activity was happening online. So we want to help small businesses across Alberta digitize and get on there so they can access their customers through the web. So, Mr. Speaker, we have partnered with Shop Here, powered by Google, as well as a digital service squad to have those free services to Alberta-based businesses with 50 or fewer employees to help them get online and serve their customers.
The honourable member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given that it's become increasingly important for small and medium-sized businesses to take their advantage of digital marketplaces to get their goods in front of customers, and given that this program is an important tool to help business owners set up and manage their online store, can the Minister of JEI update this House on how many small and medium-sized businesses have applied for this funding and what the application deadline is?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks again to that member for the question. Over 1,000 small businesses from across Alberta have taken advantage of this program to get online or improve their online presence, Mr. Speaker. Applications remain open. Go to Digital Main Street. Just Google Digital Main Street. You'll be able to get there in order to access those programs.
Honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the importance of a larger digital presence for small business for their growth and recovery, and given many small businesses in rural communities like those in my constituency do not have reliable connectivity, and given that digital divide can make it difficult for small business owners to access services of the Digital Economy Program, to the Minister of Service Alberta, can you please tell us what the government is doing to eliminate the digital divide so that small business owners in rural Alberta can take full advantage of these programs?
The Honourable the Minister of Service Alberta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a great question. And Mr. Speaker, there are so many reasons why access to reliable connectivity, reliable high-speed internet is so important to help Albertans and Alberta businesses reach their fullest potential. And that is why I'm so excited that our government was able to announce last summer a $150 million commitment to building high-speed connectivity infrastructure in rural Alberta. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I was even more excited to be able to announce that we had negotiated with the federal government to convince them to match our $150 million. That's $300 million, Mr. Speaker, and now we're working with the telcos to get that number even higher. We'll be announcing many projects in the very near future.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-McClung has a question.
I've heard many tragic stories from Alberta's trucking industry about companies impacted by the criminal blockade at Coots. I heard of truckers stranded for days with no access to food, water, or even washrooms. These truckers lost work, money, and in some cases, entire shipments were spoiled and had to be thrown away. Real impacts hitting working people hard. But the UCP has done nothing to compensate them for these hardships. Can the Minister of Transportation please tell this House what specifically she did to support these workers, or was she joining her caucus colleagues in cheerleading for those who held the border hostage?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation.
Thank you to the member for that question. And Mr. Speaker, I had also heard those same stories as well. In fact, I have a number of truckers in my constituency. So one of the things that we did was we made sure that we had extended hours at other border entries across the border to ensure that alternate routes were available for truckers. There were a number of other measures that were undertaken, but ultimately clearing that blockade, that illegal blockade, was within the purview and realm of the RCMP.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton McClung.
Given that the blockade at Coutts lasted more than 2 weeks and cost the Alberta economy at least $864 million, and given that the MLA, who in theory represents Coutts, could care less about the harm caused, and given that he said the illegal blockaders were, quote, inspiring nations, given that statement, will the minister rise in this House and tell him and others in the caucus that supported this illegal blockade they were wrong? Will she then join me in calling for them to be removed from the government caucus?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Mr. Speaker, I had gone on my social media and clearly articulated that the blockade was illegal, and I had called for law enforcement to do their very best to ensure that the border was cleared. In terms of what we did as government, we supported the RCMP and law enforcement to the best of our ability, but ultimately it was within their purview to take care of the situation.
The Honourable Member.
Given that independent truckers were especially hard hit by this illegal and intolerable blockade, and given that one company owner reported that he missed out on nearly 2 weeks of work because of the blockade, and given that this same employer reported that this blockade was having a trickle-down effect on the pay of warehouse workers and delivery drivers, the inaction and lack of support from this government for the people who work to keep our supply chain open is shameful, notwithstanding the comments of the minister. Does the minister regret not standing up against their colleagues who supported the blockade? What will she do to make amends for this failure? Again, tell the Premier to kick these MLAs out of
the Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Mr. Speaker, I have no regrets around the efforts that the government of Alberta undertook to help clear that blockade. Ultimately, it was within the realm of law enforcement to take care of it. And I have been in touch with truckers who have been impacted, and we've had many conversations. And yes, the supply chain was disrupted, but we mitigated it by making sure that we had other border entries that were open with extended hours.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Buffalo is next.
Thank you. In the last election, the Premier promised his corporate tax cut would fill the office towers in downtown Calgary. A year later, the Premier accelerated the tax cut and told companies that they would be irresponsible for not moving to Calgary. Since then, the number of head offices went from 117 to 102. Now the downtown office vacancy rate sits at record high levels, with a third of the office space sitting empty. Now another head office is about to leave as the Shaw-Rogers deal goes through the regulatory process. What is the government doing to ensure this deal won't hurt Calgary's downtown even further?
The Honourable the Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, it's a great question, even if it's ill-informed by the obvious honourable member who ought to know, because it's been explained to him and others in this House numerous times. There are head offices moving to Calgary on a regular basis. The economy is being diversified at a rate higher than ever before in Alberta. Investment is at record levels. Mr. Speaker, that's how you fill up the towers. That's how you get the head offices in here. Those folks raised the corporate taxes, collected less. We dropped them, and now businesses are coming.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Buffalo.
The numbers are the numbers, Mr. Speaker. Given that before the pandemic, investment dropped, our economy shrank, 50,000 full-time jobs were lost, and companies packed up and left, and given that Calgary already had the highest unemployment rate in the country among major cities, and given that Rogers has promised to maintain the jobs in Alberta but has gone through a transition at the top, what guarantees does the government have from Rogers that the promise to maintain jobs hasn't changed with the new leadership at the company?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, it's time to get a little bit of a legacy tour again on the NDP. When their energy minister literally told Albertans to go to BC to get a job. In 2021, 100,000 jobs were created in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. Venture capital records. Under the NDP, just a nugget of $100 million in venture capital. 5 times that in 2021, Mr. Speaker, in Alberta. We're more diversified than ever, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to come out of this pandemic stronger than ever.
Order. The honourable member.
Given that Rogers initially promised to create a fund to connect rural, remote and Indigenous communities to high-speed internet, and given that combining these two companies has led to concerns about decreased competition that would lead to higher cell phone and internet bills at a time when Albertans are already struggling to make ends meet due to the rising costs under the UCP. And once again, given that Rogers has gone through a leadership change, what guarantees does the government have that the promises of increased access to broadband and affordability will be maintained? Please be specific.
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation has the call.
Mr. Speaker, Rogers is dedicated to establishing a Western headquarters in the city of Calgary, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, creating a 500-person engineering hub as well on top of that, Mr. Speaker. We'll make sure we continue to work with them to make sure that that commitment is fulfilled, Mr. Speaker. They're also promising to invest billions of dollars into the province of Alberta, creating thousands of jobs, Mr. Speaker. We're going to make sure we hold them accountable to those commitments, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, we're creating the best possible investment environment, period, Mr. Speaker. Rogers wants to be here because of the talent that we have, Mr. Speaker, and the jobs that can be created.
The honourable member for Cardston-Siksika.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The past 2 years have brought to light the need for accountability in health. The Department of Health and Alberta Health Services, a government-funded organization, have ultimately been the source of information from which Executive Council received recommendations on responding to COVID-19. Can the Minister of Health tell the House about the process for receiving information from AHS and Alberta's Department of Health, which was used to determine the types of public health measures implemented here in the province?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged governments worldwide. Alberta's government continues to rely on Alberta Health Services and Alberta Health to share information as we have throughout the entire COVID-19 pandemic, including data, trends, and information related to the pandemic's impact on the healthcare system. In addition, the AHS Scientific Advisory Group provides research and evidence-based advice to Alberta's government on a number of pandemic-related issues, concerns, and trends. Mr. Speaker, this is in addition to the public updates by AHS leadership, Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health as well.
The honourable member for Cardston-Siksika.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that Alberta Health Services vaccine mandate led to rural Alberta losing access to health care to a point that our government had to intervene, and given that those who returned to work didn't feel welcome as a result of their earlier vaccine mandates that placed hundreds of nurses and doctors on unpaid leave, can the Honourable Minister of Health tell Albertans why the United Conservative Government felt the need to step in on this workplace vaccine mandate?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thanks again to the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, I can tell this House that I heard directly from the Honourable Member and many others regarding the challenges created by the AHS workplace vaccine policy and the impact that it could have on providing healthcare services during the fifth wave, particularly in rural Alberta. That's why Alberta's government took steps to ensure that Alberta Health Services employees would have the option to submit a negative test every 3 days so they can continue to work and provide services to Albertans during the fifth wave.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the Minister. Given that our government had to put in restrictions to protect our healthcare capacity, and given that these restrictions have led to negative impacts on Alberta's lives and livelihoods, and given that AHS is responsible for ensuring that the system has sufficient capacity, to the Minister of Health, what is the government doing to ensure that we have capacity in the future, and there will be an assessment of AHS's response, including leadership, to the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on our healthcare system?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are continually reviewing AHS's programs and processes, and that will always be a part of our effort to improve the healthcare delivery system here in Alberta. The audit completed by Ernst & Young in 2019 informed that initiative and augmented by the lessons we have learned throughout the pandemic. As we've committed, we will review the whole-of-government approach to COVID-19, which includes AHS, and as affirmed in the speech from the throne, and we'll hear later in this budget, our government is committed to increasing our hospital capacity, lowering surgical wait times, and ensuring the continuity of care of Albertans, no matter where they are in the province.
Honourable members, this concludes the time allotted for oral question period. There will be no break between now and when we move to member statements, as we will have a recess at 3 o'clock where members can prepare themselves for the budget address. The honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo has a statement to make.
Mr. Speaker, like more than 30% of Albertans, I'm proud to call Calgary home. Calgary is a wonderful place to live, full of ambitious, forward-looking people. But there is no denying that our city has faced tough times in recent years. From the oil price crash to the pandemic, we have been hit by one crisis after another. And Calgarians know we need new ideas and bold leadership to come out of this time stronger. That's why I was shocked that in the entire throne speech, a speech in which the government outlines its core priorities, Calgary was mentioned just once. Mr. Speaker, let's be honest. Calgary has never been this Premier's priority. He promised to fill Calgary's office towers, but the latest CBRE figures show the vacancy rate at 33.2%, the highest ever recorded for a major Canadian city. When it was finally announced after years of UCP obstruction that the Green Line would go ahead, the Premier didn't even bother to show up to the announcement. Mr. Speaker, the truth is this Premier won't be looking an inch south of Red Deer until after his leadership review in April. Well, I'm glad to say that the Alberta NDP caucus is picking up the slack. We have been undertaking consultations with Calgarians, elected officials, and industry experts, and we have formed a plan that will bring new energy into Calgary's downtown. Our plan includes the creation of an innovation district in downtown Calgary, encouraging collaboration amongst post-secondary students, entrepreneurs, startups, and business incubators, all located within blocks of each other. It includes establishing new post-secondary campuses and supporting the City of Calgary's downtown office conversion plan. We are proposing storefront revitalization grants, the reinstatement of Alberta's investor tax credit, and the creation of the new venture fund for Albertans to help them invest directly into early-stage company startup and scale-ups. We will be releasing our plan in the coming weeks, Mr. Premier, Mr. Speaker.
Order. What's that? I just remind members during member statements to keep all of their private conversation as quiet as possible or discreetly move it to your respective lounges. The honourable member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I was humbled to participate in a roundtable with the Premier and key representatives from Alberta's Ukrainian community. I'm a descendant of the first Ukrainian settlers to Canada, and I'm proud to be part of the 350,000 Albertans of Ukrainian descent. Ukrainians have made untold contributions to our province and to our country. Our beautiful culture stands in stark contrast to the horrific roads we've walked. The unbridled evil we are witnessing in Eastern Europe is all too familiar to Ukrainian people. My maternal grandfather, Mike Hooley, left Ukraine in the early 20th century due to the famine inflicted by the evil communist regime of Joseph Stalin. He came to Canada with his brother at the age of 17, never to return to his homeland again. There would be nothing to come home to, as his father and brother were killed by the Russians and his mother and sisters were forced off the farm. Later in life, a priest gave him a picture of an elderly woman begging on the street. It was his mother. Then he would send her money only to have it seized. He sent her babushkas, which she sold on the streets to survive, and this is how she spent her final years. Last night, many Ukrainians lost their lives at the blood-soaked hands of Vladimir Putin, and this is just the beginning. Just as I did when I wrote the Prime Minister on January 21st, I am again calling for the Canadian government and democratic governments across the world to impose the strongest sanctions possible on Vladimir Putin and his regime. History will not be kind to Vladimir Putin, and it will not be kind to those who fought against energy security for the free world. But there will be a time and a place for those conversations. Right now, my thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. A humanitarian crisis is unfolding, and democratic nations must stand together and unite to protect the innocent, peaceful, and beautiful Ukraine. God bless Ukraine.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to diversifying Alberta's economy as we work to create jobs, opportunity, and prosperity for all. And Mr. Speaker, it's working. In 2021, it was a record-breaking year for Alberta's exports, and we saw significant investments in tech, film and television, energy, and record investments in venture capital. Alberta is now home to more than 3,000 technology companies. To support this growing momentum and strengthen our workforce, we've introduced the Accelerated Immigration Pathway for the tech sector. This initiative aims to attract highly skilled tech professionals and will help tech employers grow their businesses while bolstering the skills of the wider Alberta workforce. We're also diversifying and growing through Alberta's booming film and television industry. In 2021 alone, we had nearly $1 billion in production costs. The Last of Us, which HBO shot right here in Alberta, was Canada's largest ever film production. With high-budget, high-profile projects putting Alberta on the map, we hope to attract even larger projects moving forward. At the same time, this government is dedicated to investing in clean, renewable energies. We have developed strategies to capitalize on opportunities in hydrogen and essential and rare earth minerals, which are critical to supporting a low-carbon economy. As a result, Alberta is already among global leaders in emissions-reducing technology. At our current pace, we are set to fully transition from coal-powered electricity by the end of 2023, 6 years ahead of the federal target. Furthermore, and despite the pandemic, in 2020, we broke an all-time record for venture capital investments, closing $455 million in deals. As of September 2021, we had surpassed that record by 5.5%. And just this past month, the Alberta Enterprise Corporation announced $31 million to help Alberta technology and health innovation companies grow. Mr. Speaker, against all odds, Alberta's economy is growing and diversifying. I'm excited to see the new and diverse opportunities for my constituents of Calgary Southeast and for all Albertans. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton West Henday has a statement to make.
This UCP government is hammering household budgets for Alberta families every single month. Thanks to the UCP, Albertans are paying more income tax, more property tax, more school fees, more tuition, more interest on student debt, more for camping, more for car insurance, and more for utilities. We can all see what's happening at the grocery store as well. The same basket of groceries is getting more and more expensive every month. In a recent Angus Reid poll, 47% of respondents in Alberta said it was difficult or very difficult to afford enough food for their family. Now, when in government, the NDP put a cap on auto insurance rate increases. The UCP, of course, removed that cap to pander to insurance lobbyists, and now Albertans are reaching out to me with bills that have spiked by 40% or more when they are barely even driving their vehicle. We've heard from Albertans who have had to abandon their car they used to go to work because they can't afford the insurance. The UCP dismantled the price protections that the NDP built into the electricity system, and now Alberta families are paying hundreds of dollars more every month. Yesterday, my colleagues showed what that means in real terms. A shopping cart stacked full of food and diapers, that's being taken away by these soaring costs. Young Albertans are being hit with massive hikes to post-secondary tuition and have had to pay higher interest on the debt they're piling up to pay them. Seniors and vulnerable Albertans can afford less and less food every month because the UCP uncoupled their benefits from inflation, something they specifically promised they wouldn't do. Even the child and family benefit buys less and less every month, making it harder and harder to raise a family in Alberta. Instead of fixing these mistakes, the UCP wants to press ahead with more expensive vanity projects that Albertans don't want and gamble away their pension savings. This UCP government, simply put, is incompetent, Mr. Speaker, and they are completely out of touch with the punishing monthly costs they are forcing on Alberta families.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, Albertans have seen significant increases in their utility bills, and some of my constituents have written to me asking what can be done. A few repeat the opposition canard that the removal of the NDP price cap is entirely to blame. By using the Alberta Consumer Advocate comparison tool, I have demonstrated to several constituents that the cap removal is virtually an irrelevance. It is also important to recognize that all this price cap does is mask the true cost and move the burden from ratepayers to taxpayers, who are often the same people. I also pointed out, while distracting consumers with their price cap, the NDP simultaneously gouged them with an unnecessary carbon tax. We made it our first order of business to remove this tax. I have spoken previously in the House regarding the incomprehensible ideology that believes a carbon tax will save the planet. These taxes disproportionately harm the poorest in society, a group the NDP claims to champion. The true cause of the price increases is threefold: increases in distribution and transmission charges due to infrastructure development and maintenance, a steep increase in the federal carbon tax, and global market conditions. Not to mention, the NDP made matters worse by prematurely closing coal-fired power stations. They celebrated this phase-out without ever mentioning to Albertans that moving away from that reliable and affordable power source would inevitably mean bills would increase. They didn't warn Albertans. They didn't have a plan to mitigate the negative effects of their policy. The closest thing they came to a plan was hiding behind a rate cap, which they also did not share the true cost of. Mr. Speaker, among the many thankful announcements in the throne speech, I was delighted to see the government give notice to introduce a natural gas consumer protection program. While this is good news, it is incumbent upon this House to seek to remove carbon taxes on personal utility bills and find more sustainable ways to fund vital energy infrastructure.
The honourable member for Edmonton Meadows is next.
Mr. Speaker, I want to express my deepest condolences to the family and the community of Ledger Toole. Last week, Ledger Toole was shot during confrontation with the Calgary Police Service. His death is a reminder that the use of force must always be the last resort and is not a substitute for trauma-informed care and mental health support. Racialized communities deserve better care and compassion from institutions, including the police. I stand before you today to advocate for those who see themselves, their family, and their communities reflected in Ledger. As elected officials, it is our moral responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of the people we represent. As part of that responsibility, the NDP caucus consulted with hundreds of Albertans on the issue of public safety. The communities we have met want to take an approach to the public safety that extends beyond policing. Participants told us they want better and deeper consideration for how social determinants and health impact public safety, more wraparound services, and the community-centered approaches to law enforcement. That is why I am calling on this House, this legislature, to take action, to strengthen citizen oversight process and bodies to address and investigate complaints against law enforcement, to ensure ongoing anti-racism cultural knowledge, sensitivity education, and trauma-informed training for law enforcement, creating cultural and diversity liaison position to integrate better the needs of communities in policing, building and supporting trauma-informed mental health supports for vulnerable populations. And lastly, I'm calling for a special anti-racism panel to be involved in a review of the Police Act that would specifically bring a report with recommendations on improving policing and the broader justice system. As we navigate through the challenges of this modern world, I hope this Assembly can work together to make Alberta better for all.
The honourable member for Drayton Valley Devon has a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As this House meets today, Ukraine is being attacked from the air, sea, and land, from the north, south, and the east by the Russian superpower in a blatant act of imperial aggression. The armed forces and the people in Ukraine are resisting the invader. It is clear to this MLA that it is time for this legislature to place this issue before God. I would like to read the 23rd Psalm and ask the legislature to use the remaining time of this member's statement in silent prayer for the people of Ukraine. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul, and he leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
The honourable member for Red Deer South.
Amen. Mr. Speaker, the Red Deer Regional Hospital serves about 400,000 throughout central Alberta. In 2017, in response to negligence by AHS NDP governments, citizens formed the Society for Hospital Expansion in Central Alberta, or SHECA. SHECA forced, through FOIA, AHS data showing the Central Zone was ignored and neglected over the past decade, receiving only about 1/10 of health funding compared to the rest of the province. In the result, residents of Central Alberta were forced to Edmonton and Calgary for services that should have been available locally. Sometimes they died in the process of doing so, such as from heart attacks. Mr. Speaker, the NDP were aware of this unfairness, but what did the Socialists do about it? Mr. Speaker, they did nothing. They were too busy forcing an NDP drug site on Red Deer. But, Mr. Speaker, we should remember throughout this unfairness one variable remained the same: AHS. AHS needs to be dismantled and built back better. Nevertheless, yesterday marked a transformative day for the hospital and for Central Alberta with a $1.8 billion expansion. I am happy for community leaders like SHECA, who advocated for fairness based on merit and need. Thank you. But most important, I am happy for families and individuals in Central Alberta who will be blessed by this monumental investment with better health services and outcomes as they live and work in our communities.
The honourable member for Edmonton Decore has a member statement.
This week we heard this government's throne speech, and for those Albertans watching, it's clear that the speech was more about saving this premier's leadership than putting forward a vision for Albertans. A plan for our largest city? Not present. A plan for agriculture? Nowhere to be seen. A plan to make life more affordable for Albertans? Not this government's priority, apparently. Instead, Albertans heard the same thing they've been hearing since this government took office, including promises of more red tape reduction, which sadly is the closest thing this government has to an economic plan. Their trophy, a pair of golden scissors. But the pain experienced by Albertans, that's what really cuts deep. And while the Premier spends $10 to $12 million on this ministry, Albertans are left wondering, what exactly are they getting for this? Some of the, quote, red tape that the UCP cuts include a corporate handout that went towards creating jobs in Newfoundland, Wisconsin, and others, but not in Alberta. Firing the elections commissioner was investigating the UCP leadership race. Canceling environmental monitoring during the pandemic. Lifting the Lougheed policy designed to protect the eastern slopes from being torn down for coal mining. Selling parks, trying to steal the pensions of teachers, raising income taxes, slashing supports for the most vulnerable, cutting education funding, and more. And as they've hinted at, I'm sure Albertans can expect to see the next great red tape initiative from this government to be a headlong drive to privatize our healthcare system. After nearly 3 years of this UCP government, Albertans deserve a real plan. A plan not based on dated buzzwords and the Premier's failed priorities, but one that reflects the priorities of Albertans and builds the future. And even though Albertans didn't get that in this plan, this throne speech, and many doubt that they will see that in today's budget, rest assured that in 2023, they will have a plan and a leader to build Alberta in the future.
Unfortunately, the daily routine has not been extended, and now that it is 3 o'clock, it concludes the daily routine. We will take a 15-minute recess as the Minister of Finance, budget officials, media, and others prepare for the budget address. The House will reconvene at 3:15.